There it is. That's the story of this football game. Spread them around pretty evenly. Greg Martin. Another punt. Dwayne Thomas bobbles the football. The Giants recover, I believe. Yes, it is. Bottom of the pile, number 58, Jim Files.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to check out this video, and welcome to the Gridiron. I just want to say thank you to everybody out there, anybody who's subscribed to my channel, anybody who's watched my videos, maybe giving it a thumbs up, or anybody who left a comment or anything like that. Thank you so much as I'm trying to get my channel up and running, so I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now, 1927, I was the 8th year in the history of the NFL. It was the 3rd year in the history of the New York Football Giants. Now, you got to remember 1927. If you ever Google 1927 New York Giants, what's going to pop up a lot will be like probably the baseball Giants, because baseball, boxing, and college football were huge back then. The NFL was not. All right, so if you ever want to get any information on the Giants, back then, you might want to type in 1927 New York Football Giants. All right. In 1925, the first year the Giants were there was 20 teams in the league, okay? The next year in 26, it went up to 22 teams. Now, what the NFL did for 1927 was that they wound up, they got rid of a lot of the financially weaker teams. So they got rid of 12 teams, okay? And they wound up keeping 12. It was just one big, league, 12 teams. Whoever at the end of the season had the best record got the championship, okay? Now, the 12 teams that got disbanded were, I just got them written down here so I don't forget. 12 teams that got axed was the Kansas City Cowboys, the LA Buccaneers, Detroit Panthers, the Hartford Blues, the Brooklyn Lions, the Canton Bulldogs, the Milwaukee Badgers, the Akron Indians, the Racine Tornadoes, the Columbus Tigers, the Hammond Pros, and the Louisville Colonels. They were all financially weak, and the NFL got rid of them. The 12 teams that existed for the 1927 season was the Buffalo Bison. They were the Buffalo Rangers, and it changed back to the Buffalo Bison. They only played 5 games that year, and after the 5th game, they disbanded and never played ever again. They lost all 5 games by a combined score of 123-8. So in those 5 games, Buffalo scored a touchdown and a safety, and that was it. Okay. The Chicago Bears, Chicago Cardinals, Cleveland Bulldogs, Dayton Triangles, the Duluth Eskimos, Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, Green Bay Packers, the New York Giants, the New York Yankees, the Pottsville Maroons, and the Providence Steamrollers. Those were the 12 teams that were in existence in 1927 that formed the NFL. Now, the Duluth Eskimos, this was the last year that they were going to be in existence. They were coached by Ernie Nevers. Now, he is part of NFL history. He's part of 2 NFL records. One he owns, and the other one is he's tied with. All right. In 1929, he played for the Chicago Cardinals. Right. They played the Chicago Bears in 1929. They won 40-6. Now, he had 6 rushing touchdowns in that game. That's the record that he's tied with. A little bit more on that in a second. The other record that he owns is he scored all 40 points in those games for the Chicago Cardinals. He had 6 rushing touchdowns and he kicked 4 extra points. So that record of 40 points is all his. Since 1929, nobody's touched it. The 6 rushing touchdowns, or 6 touchdowns in the game he has been equaled. The 6 rushing touchdowns was equal last year when Alvin Kamara scored 6 rushing touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings. The 6 touchdowns, okay, was Alvin Kamara, Gale Sayers in 1965, okay, but Gale Sayers' 6 touchdowns, one came on an 80-yard screen pass for a touchdown. Then he scored 4 rushing touchdowns, and then his last touchdown, he returned a punt back for a touchdown. So he didn't have 6 rushing touchdowns, but he had 6 touchdowns in the game. That was his rookie season, 1965. The other one was William Dub Jones in 1951 for the Cleveland Browns. They played against the Chicago Bears. They won 42-21. William Dub Jones, okay, had 6 touchdowns. He had 4 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, his 6th touchdown came compliments of Otto Graham, because Otto Graham knew the record was 6. He knew Dub had 5. He was trying to get Dub Jones his final touchdown, so or another touchdown to tie the record. So what he did was, the play came in as a running play. Well, Otto Graham audibled out of the running play and called the passing play, and he hit Dub Jones with a 43-yard touchdown pass to give him 6 to tie the record. Now, William Dub Jones also touched the ball 12 times the whole game. He scored 6 touchdowns. He also scored the last 5 times he touched the ball. Now, that's a feat that'll probably never be tied ever again. Also in that game, the game was set the NFL record, which still has not been broken, for the most penalties called in a game, 37. The Cleveland Browns had 21 penalties called on them. The Chicago Bears had 16 called on them. Included in those penalties, one was roughing the passer. It was against Otto Graham. The Chicago Bears came in and broke his nose, but he finished the game anyway. But anyway, the other one was Coach Don Shula. Wasn't the coach back then. He was he was a player for the Cleveland Browns. Picked the pass off, ran it back 94 yards for a touchdown. Well, that got called back because of a roughing the passer penalty. Now, it insinuated so much that a couple of the Cleveland Brown players got so pissed off at that fact that they wound up getting in the umpire's face, and they wound up getting thrown out of the game. So 37 penalties got called in that game. Pretty impressive. That was a rough game. But Dub Jones, 1951, he had 6 touchdowns as well. So Ernie Nevers, the coach, all right, of the Duluth Eskimos, he had 6 touchdowns in the game. Alvin Kamara, 6 touchdowns in the game. Gale Sayre, 6 touchdowns in the game. So 4 guys have 6 touchdowns in a game. All right, but that's Ernie Nevers. He's in the College Football and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, in 1927, all right, as I said, there was only 12 teams. 1926, 5 black players played in the NFL. Sadly, in 1927, just for the 1 year, sadly in 1927, for whatever reason, there were no black players played in the NFL. One of the problems that a lot of the NFL teams had back then was scheduling games. You know, there was no 16-game schedule. It was like you got to schedule, you know, the games when you can. Now, one of the problems was like the Buffalo Bison. They only wound up playing 5 games. They lost all 5 games by a score of 123-8. They didn't play anymore after that. Well, I mean, the Giants played 13 games that year. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets wound up playing 18 games. You know, there's a lot of teams. I think that the Green Bay played 10 games that year. So there was a lot of different amount of games that got played that year. One rule change that year was the goalposts in 1926 were on the goal line. They got moved to the end line in 1927. So from 1927 to 1932, the goalposts were on the end line. 1933 to 1973, they got moved back to the goal line. 1974 till now, and they probably always will be, they got moved back to the end line. The Giants, that one particular year, 1927, they were second in the league. They scored 197 points. They were number 1 in the league with defense. In 13 games, they gave up 20 points, 1.5 points per game. Pretty good. Not even Lawrence Taylor can top that. They had 10 shutout victories. They gave up 3 rushing touchdowns all year. They played in a variety, of different, stadiums, different sized crowds. The smallest crowd that they played in front of was that they played against the Cleveland Bulldogs on October 2nd, 1927. They played at Luna Park. There was a grand total of 3,000 fans there. The biggest crowd of the season that they played against was against the Providence Steamroller, all right, at the Polo Grounds. It was a grand total of 38,000 fans at that one particular day. So they, wasn't, the NFL wasn't that popular. They had a hard time getting fans, and so they very rarely ever played in front of a packed crowd. Now, one interesting fact was in week 6 of that season, the Giants basically played a home and away. All right, they played 2 games in 1 week. They played back-to-back games against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. On October 22nd, they played at Frankfurt Stadium in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Giants won that game 13-0. The next day, on October 23rd, the Giants played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets at the Polo Grounds, and the Giants won that game 27-0. You know, they played 2 games in 2 days. That's some pretty brutal. That's a brutal schedule. But I mean, that's the way it was back then. You had to schedule your games like as you could. You know, sometimes the more games you could schedule, hopefully you could make some more money. And if you couldn't make money, obviously you had to expand. As simple as it was. But it was a very exciting season. Now, as I said, there was no playoffs. Whoever wound up in first place wound up winning the trophy that year. All right. So after 7 weeks, the Bears were in first place. They were 5-0-1. After 7 weeks, the Giants were 6-1-1, and the Packers were 5-1-1. Basically, it was a 3-team race the whole season, right? But there was 2 games that were played, all right, in New York City on Tuesday, November 8th, that changed the whole standings. The Yankees beat the Bears 26-6, giving the Bears their first loss of the season, and the Giants beat the Providence Steamroller 25-0. So the Giants at 7-1-1 were therefore in first place. Then on November 20th, the Bears beat the Packers, 14-6. All right. So the Bears were 7-1-1, all right, and the Giants were just barely in front of them, but that gave the Packers their second loss of the season. All right. Then on Thanksgiving Day, the Bears lost to the Cardinals 3-0. All right, real barn burner there. So that gave the Bears their second loss. So the Packers were 7-2-1, the Bears were 7-2-1, and the Giants were in first place because they only had 1 loss. So the biggest game of the season came down on November 27th, at the Polo Grounds in front of 15,000 fans, where the Bears, who were 7-2-1, were facing the Giants, who were 8-1-1. So if the Bears could win, they would be tied with first place, the Giants. Okay. The game was scoreless at halftime. The Giants scored 13 points in the third quarter. Bears only scored 7 points in the fourth quarter, and the Giants wound up winning 13-7. So that put the Giants well in front. That gave the Bears their third loss of the season. They were 7-3-1. The Giants were, at that time, were 9-1-1. The Giants finished the season. They had 2 games that went up against the New York Yankees, basically, to decide, if the Giants were going to win the title or not. The Giants won both games. They won the first game 14-0. Then they won the last game of the season against the New York Yankees 13-0, which gave the Giants a final record of 11-1-1 and gave the New York Football Giants, in their 3rd year of existence, gave them their first NFL championship. Now, after that was over, the Giants, on the day after Christmas of that year, on December 26, 1927, they played an exhibition game in Oklahoma, against the Homoni Indians. They were all Native American Indian team. They were a professional football team. They never entered the NFL, but they were all Native American Indian team. And they played from 1920 to 1932, and after 1932 they disbanded because due to the Great Depression they just couldn't afford to keep the team in existence anymore. But one of the things that the Homoni Indians they had a 28-game winning streak, which is pretty darn impressive. Well, on this particular day, December 26, 1927, the Homoni Indians beat the New York Football Giants 13-6. Kind of makes you wonder if the Homoni Indians ever actually entered the NFL, what they could have possibly done. But anyway, that did nothing to take away from the fact that the Giants finished the 1927 season with an 11-1-1 record and their first NFL championship. Well, as always, guys, thank you so much for taking time any day to check out this video. You guys stay safe out there and go Giants. Woo!